I just touched down in the scam capital of the world. That's right, today I am in Sihanouk, Cambodia. If you've ever received any weird text message on your WhatsApp or your Telegram from somebody you don't know claiming that maybe they had a wrong number, but then continued having the conversation, there's a good chance they were trying to target you for one of these investment scams. But the question is, how did this place go from a tiny little port city in the south of Cambodia to having massive compounds where people were held against their will and forced to rip off foreigners from around the world using different investing scams, including stocks and crypto, among a lot of other things. So in the 60s, Cambodian government and the French partnered to build up the port at Sihanoukville. After that, you had all kinds of other regional disruptions, including the Vietnam War. You had the rule by the communist Khmer Rouge. It wasn't really until the 90s that you started seeing more international trade. Soon after, they started developing actually a pretty cool little tourist industry, and this became a pretty popular place for Western backpackers to come. Right now, I'm on Otras Beach, which was like one of the main hotspots for foreign tourists. Starting in 2013, the Chinese started something called the Belt and Road Initiative. It was basically a strategic and economic partnership with a lot of the different countries in Asia, all the way over to Pakistan, Cambodia, Thailand, like countries all around the area. They wanted to basically cement their position as a regional power. And so one of the big things they started doing was investing in major infrastructure projects. So like in Cambodia, they decided to start working on the highway that connects Sihanoukville back to the capital, Phnom Penh. They started helping upgrade the port here in Sihanoukville, upgrading the port to help modern trade for Chinese goods, but also as a strategic port for the Chinese Navy. So with the inflow of Chinese workers starting in 2013 through 2016, you started seeing one of the things that's illegal in mainland China is gambling. But one of the things that Chinese people like to do is they like to gamble, but they can't in mainland China, aside from Macau, which is sort of a little special designated zone for gambling. So suddenly you had this large influx of foreign Chinese workers coming into Cambodia, and when they wanted to gamble, some Chinese capitalists saw an opportunity and they started investing in casinos, and those were a huge hit. So much so that like not just the workers were gambling in them, but you started seeing Chinese tourists coming in. They're like already started setting up a lot of things that, you know, made Chinese feel more at home. You had the restaurants, the types of bars they like, and you were building up sort of a little mini China here in the southern part of Cambodia. In 2017, one of the biggest things that China is always concerned about is capital outflows. They're doing all this work to centralize their economy and plan everything, but because their investment markets are just not very trustworthy, what ends up happening is you have a lot of people that basically make a lot of money through relationships and businesses of varying degrees of legitimacy, some legit, some not so legit, but they want to get their money out of China and into more stable markets. But because there's all kinds of different limitations that the Chinese government imposes on that because they don't want you to do that, people have to start getting creative. Go in, the casino doesn't really ask how you made the money. You go in with what you have, and then you play whatever game you're gonna play with the basic idea that you need to play something where you're gonna kind of break close to even. Because at the end of the day, it was money that you didn't get through super honest, ethical means, so you're willing to take a 10%, 20% haircut. So, and this was going on for a while, and it started getting really, really popular in Macau. The issue with that was once the Chinese government saw that a lot of capital was flowing to Macau via all this online gambling and all these casinos that were licensed to do this activity in Macau, the Chinese government decided to clamp down on it and outlaw online gambling in Macau. So suddenly when the whole money laundering scam of online gambling became outlawed in Macau, all the people that were running those systems still had people relying on it to wash their money. They needed to do it somewhere else. And so that was when you actually started seeing the real explosion of online gambling in Cambodia, or in Sihanoukville. And so they had a legitimate casino, and then the Cambodian government would also issue legal online casino licenses. And so this happened in a couple places around Southeast Asia, but the reason that it became particularly predominant in Sihanoukville was just because it was right there. It was a port. It already was a bit of a tourist environment. There was a little bit looser regulations on setting all this stuff up than other parts of Southeast Asia. And because it was a port and because you needed to build stuff, you could get building material there extremely quickly just by shipping it in, slapping it up, moving fast. And so that was what happened was you had this crazy, crazy boom in 2017 to 2019 where, and this was like when Sihanoukville became a boomtown. And during this time, the population in Sihanoukville actually rose up to being, it was 100,000 Cambodians. Suddenly you had another 100,000 Chinese people coming here just there to work within the sort of the casino ecosystem for the Chinese. And so Sihanoukville actually became kind of a mini China. It was 50% Chinese during that time period from 17 to 19. The reason that 2019 is important is because that was when the Chinese government identified that this thing that they had previously clamped down on in Macau was just going overseas. They were still having all these issues with capital outflows from mainland China. And so the other part of having the Belt and Road Initiative is you have financial leverage on people that sign up for this program. So yeah, you're helping them build highways and ports and stuff like that, but then you're also having them you also have the ability to put pressure on them to, carry out policies that you want. And so in 2019, the Chinese government started pressuring the Cambodian government to stop issuing these online gambling licenses. Seemed innocent enough, but that was when a lot of the capital started just drying up and so a lot of these buildings throughout Sihanoukville, it feels like it's post-apocalyptic. Like a lot of these buildings aren't even inhabited, or they aren't half finished. It's just a bunch of concrete towers. Like as I walk around, you see basically just a concrete tower with no walls, no anything. It's just shit that's just built straight up in the air because in 2019, when online gambling got cut off, that was it. Everyone just stopped constructing right there in place. Chinese Mafia, they invested heavily in these casinos. They built them up, and suddenly they were on the hook to pay for everything, but they no longer had a legitimate business. So they basically just had a lot of open space that they still needed to pay for the overhead. What they decided to do was take all that infrastructure they were previously using for online gambling and converting it over to scam centers. I remember back in 16, 17, every now and then, you'd get a random text message from somebody. I had a Korean phone number at the time on my WhatsApp, so if somebody messaged it, they would always be like, "Hi, Mr. Kim, are you prepared for the meeting on Saturday?" And obviously, if you look at my photo is clearly visible. I ain't looking like a Mr. Kim. So nobody that would ever message that, if they were actually paying attention to what they were doing, would ever think that somehow I'm a Mr. Kim. Or they would just text me in Korean, and the way that they wrote it, by the grammar and some of the vocabulary they were using, it was really, really obvious that this was not a person that actually spoke Korean. And so by the awkwardness of the way that they were talking, I could immediately be like, oh, this is obviously like a scammer. And it would be like a joke, you'd get some weird message, you'd screen cap it, you'd send it into the group chat with the other guys, hey, look at this crap. And then it became so common that it wasn't even worth sharing anymore. It was just a random nuisance, like getting an spam email. And the thing was, I guess the way that they don't make it very convincing on purpose, because the general idea is they want to target people gullible, that are naive, that are lonely, whatever the case may be, but basically people that have some kind of a weakness. And if you're immediately able to figure out that, if they lower the difficulty so much that only the dumbest people fall for it, they can immediately eliminate anybody that's a little more sophisticated. But we didn't actually know what the story was behind it. We would just get like these annoying text messages. They would reply back, and it was clear there was a human responding. It was just very obvious that it was some sort of weird con game. And it wasn't really until a couple years ago that we started hearing about this whole thing of, oh yeah, there's these scam centers in Cambodia. They're the ones that are always sending these weird messages. But then we also started hearing that people were actually trapped in these things. They were actually human trafficked. They come from Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines. Also, 50% of them actually Chinese. The Chinese Mafia was also targeting their own people. But then you find out that the conditions these people are actually kept in, they're kept against their will. They're put into buildings that have barred off windows. They're not allowed any external communication. And if they try to escape, if they refuse to work, if they do anything out of line whatsoever, they get tortured pretty severely in some pretty horrific ways. So you had all the casino workers that like they didn't want to do this scam thing. So you had a huge flight of people out of there. A lot of people that were doing that at the time were Chinese. So they're just like, I don't want to scam people. And so they went on back to China. And so the mob, they had all this empty space and they needed to, they needed to keep the lights on, they needed to pay the rent. So they decided, hey, we're just going to expand our human trafficking operations. And then they started bringing in people from Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand against their will. And you put on top of the fact that this all was taking place in that late 2019, early 2020 period, as we all know, at the very beginning of the COVID lockdown start taking place. And that killed tourism. So you didn't even have any people coming to the casinos. It hurt the economy in all kinds of other ways. And it wasn't really until about 2022 that you started seeing little things sort of sneak out of what was going on. You saw occasionally someone would manage to get on a phone. These people are working online all day. And so even though they're heavily monitored, heavily limited, in the off chance that somebody's looking the other way, they have just a little bit of trust, they'll be able to get onto one of 1,000 different ways to reach out to their family and let them know, like, hey, I am being held against my will in Cambodia. So you started having these weird signs in about 2021, 2022 of like, hey, there's something really sketchy and really weird going on in Cambodia. And that was when you started seeing a lot more international attention. Then also because 50% of the people that were being wrapped up in this were Chinese nationals. And so the Chinese government is like, it's a very bad look in every single way. So we need to do something about this. And then also just obviously the legitimate human rights concerns. And so they started putting pressure on the Cambodians to start cracking down on all these scam centers. And sure enough, they started doing it. And it's taken a while. It built up time. There was a lot of corruption issues. There was a lot of different things that made it really difficult. And so it was something that took a little bit of time to pick up any momentum. But right now, here we are in 2026, and starting from mid-2025 up until November, the Cambodian government had broken up. Estimates vary between 100 to 200 scam centers, depending on kind of how you count them. And so actually been a serious effort to crack down on this and end this horrible thing that was happening. And so in 2025, they started actually really aggressively cracking down on these scam centers. And so anybody that was already getting them, have you noticed that you don't really get those as often anymore? And so, when I was talking to another expat on the bus when I was coming down here, and he's lived in the area for 8 years, and he told me about like that it's the most depressing place, a shithole, it's post-apocalyptic, you have all these empty buildings, and the ones that have people on it is all just a bunch of like, shady mafia people. And yeah, you still have the casinos. I'm here on the beach here in Ultras, and honestly, it's a bunch of Cambodians just hanging out, families, having barbecues. And I'm like, this doesn't feel like a ghost town at all. It just feels like a place that has different kinds of buildings, like the former scam centers where you have the barred off windows. And those are really depressing because they're like a monument to human rights violations and treating people like cattle. But then you also have the casinos that are nice and are obviously still actively laundering money. And then as you're walking around, mostly what you see is just a bunch of buildings that are half built, which is sort of ominous and scary. But like even to that extent, I would say the half built buildings are maybe 10%, 20% of the skyline. And then you look a little bit closer, you actually see there's a crane by it. So it was a very dark time, but it was also a very dark time taking place during a dark time for all of us during that COVID period. And to me, that almost is just a testament to what happens when you have multiple converging government programs that are intended to restrict people's freedoms. You are going to have different collateral damage take place. And when you have multiples of them going on, you have intersecting gaps where you have horrible things happen. You have massive money laundering. You have human rights abuses of people enslaved in these scam centers. And then the other people in the other countries that are getting scammed. Like there's billions of dollars that have been scammed off Americans, Canadians, Europeans, all these people. And, so it was just overall a horrible thing. And when I see all these buildings like half built, one of the things that, I kind of think is, at least in a lot of cases, these are like when the guns fell silent, like all they were doing was being propped up by a very corrupt, very exploitative system It's like being sad that a slave plantation is deserted or something like that. This is a bad thing. We don't want these things to continue. And, you can repurpose the buildings. The Cambodian government is in efforts to try to bring back, try to sell the rights to these buildings and have other people finish the construction to repurpose them, turn them into condos, turn them into hotels, and bring this up because Sihanoukville is actually a really, really beautiful city. It has a lot of potential. I really feel like it was just a very dark recent past that affected a lot of people very negatively, but it looks like it's it's recovering, it's finding its footing. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next few years, like this is actually a really nice place that a lot of people want to visit, whether it's to come here gambling, bring their family, go on a boys trip, bring your fiance, whatever. Hey, and so like it's actually really nice, and it reminds me of other beach cities that I really enjoyed that I've been to throughout my life. And so ultimately, I thought I was gonna tell a scary story about all these mafia guys and these scam prisons. And like as I was walking around the city and taking a look at everything and doing my research, I just don't see that. So if you thought that was interesting and you want to hear what I think about the ghost city in Phnom Penh, then go ahead and click on that video right there.